Captain Jake Miller wiped the sweat from his palms as he looked around the enormous fighting arena. The place was absolutely massive, bigger than any football stadium he'd ever seen back home in Texas. Thousands of alien creatures filled the seats, their strange voices creating a buzz that echoed off the crystal walls. Some had tentacles instead of arms. Others had scales that shimmered like oil, and a few looked like walking rocks with glowing eyes. Jake had seen plenty of weird things during his time as a Marine, but nothing quite like this. After leaving the military, he'd spent 5 quiet years fixing cars and trucks in his hometown garage. He never thought he'd end up representing the entire human race in some cosmic gladiator match. But here he was. The other humans on Earth's diplomatic team were all fancy politicians and scientists with college degrees. Jake was just a guy who knew how to fix engines and throw a decent punch. But when the Galactic Council said Earth needed to send someone to their combat trials, the politicians had looked at his military record and decided he was their best shot. Ambassador Kelton walked over with that snooty look that reminded Jake of every stuck-up officer he'd ever met. The alien was tall and skinny, with bright blue skin and 4 eyes that kept looking Jake up and down like he was inspecting a broken-down pickup truck. His fancy robes probably cost more than Jake, made in a year back at the garage. "Your species really puzzles us, human," Kelton said in that smooth voice that dripped with fake politeness. "You look so weak and soft. Your bones seem thin, your skin has no natural armor, and you don't even have claws or fangs." He paused and tilted his head. "Are you absolutely sure you don't want to give up now? There's no shame in admitting you're outmatched." Jake had heard that tone before from drill sergeants, bullies, and know-it-all customers who thought they could fix their own cars better than he could. He adjusted his old baseball cap, the one with the oil stains that his ex-wife always complained about, and spit a stream of tobacco juice into the sandy arena floor. "Well, partner, giving up ain't really something I'm good at," Jake said with a slow smile. "Besides, I came all this way. Might as well see what all the fuss is about." The energy barrier around the fighting pit started humming and glowing with a blue light that made Jake's teeth ache. He could feel the electricity in the air, like right before a big thunderstorm back home. The crowd got louder and more excited, their alien voices rising to a fever pitch. Then Jake's opponent entered the arena, and even he had to admit the thing was impressive. Vorthak looked like someone had crossed a rhinoceros with a tank and then covered the whole thing in black armor plating. The creature stood 9 feet tall and probably weighed as much as Jake's pickup truck. Its shell-like skin gleamed under the bright arena lights, and when it moved, Jake could hear the scraping sound of armor plates rubbing against each other. The alien spectators went absolutely crazy when they saw Vorthak. They were cheering and making clicking sounds and waving whatever they had instead of hands. Jake caught enough of their chatter to understand that this particular beast had never lost a match. In fact, most opponents didn't survive his first attack. "Great," Jake muttered to himself, rolling his shoulders to loosen up. Just like high school football all over again. He looked up at the observation deck where the other humans were watching. Dr. Lisa Bennett, the team's medical officer, was checking her equipment and looking worried. Commander Robert Hayes gave him a thumbs up from behind the reinforced glass. They all believed in him, or at least they were pretending to. Jake stretched his back and cracked his knuckles, the way he always did before getting under the hood of a particularly stubborn engine. Vorthak was just another problem to solve, another challenge to work through. The beast's eyes glowed red as it studied him, probably wondering why such a small, weak-looking creature was standing in its arena. "Well, this should be interesting," Jake said to himself, settling into the fighting stance his old drill sergeant had beaten into him years ago. The moment Vorthak moved, Jake knew he was in serious trouble. The massive alien's fist came down like a wrecking ball, faster than anything that big had any right to move. Jake had faced plenty of tough guys in bar fights and during his Marine days, but this was like standing in front of a freight train. The punch connected with his rib cage with a sound that made everyone in the arena wince. It was like someone had dropped a piano from a 10-story building. The impact sent shockwaves through Jake's entire body, and he could taste copper in his mouth immediately. His vision went white for a split second, and every nerve in his body screamed at him to just lie down and stay down. But Jake Miller had been hit before. He'd taken punches from drunk cowboys twice his size, absorbed tackles from linebackers who outweighed him by 50 pounds, and survived explosions in Afghanistan that had left him temporarily deaf. This hurt worse than all of those combined, but pain was just pain. The alien crowd went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop in that massive coliseum. Even the weird chittering and buzzing sounds that had been constant background noise suddenly stopped. Thousands of alien eyes watched as Jake staggered backward, his boots sliding in the sand. 1 step back, 2 steps, 3. Then he planted his feet, shook his head like a dog coming out of water, and rolled his shoulders the way he did every morning when he got out of bed. His ribs felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer to them, and he was pretty sure he could taste blood, but he was still standing. "That all you got, big guy?" Jake asked, wiping a trickle of blood from the corner of his mouth with the back of his hand. He even managed to grin, though it felt like his face might crack from the effort. Up in the observation deck, Dr. Lisa Bennett was staring at her medical scanner, like it had grown a second head. The readings didn't make any sense. Jake's ribs were definitely cracked, possibly broken in 2 places. His heart rate was through the roof, and his stress hormones were at levels that should have put him in shock. "This is impossible," she whispered to Commander Robert Hayes, who was standing next to her with his mouth hanging open. "Those readings, he should be unconscious. Or worse." "But he's not," Hayes replied, unable to hide the pride in his voice. "That's our boy." Down in the arena, Vorthak was making clicking and grinding sounds that the translation devices couldn't quite handle. The closest the computers could manage was something like, "How is this happening?" Or, "This cannot be real." The massive creature's 4 eyes were all focused on Jake, and for the first time in his long fighting career, Vorthak looked confused. Jake had seen that look before, usually on the faces of bullies who discovered that their favorite target wasn't going to roll over and take it anymore. It was a look of someone who had never met real stubborn before. "You know what your problem is?" Jake said, raising his fists and settling back into his fighting stance. "You've been fighting the wrong kind of opponents. These other aliens probably fold the moment things get rough." He spit another stream of blood into the sand and took a step forward. His ribs protested every movement, sending sharp pains through his chest. But Jake had learned a long time ago that sometimes you had to work through the hurt. "Where I come from, we call that Tuesday morning," he continued, bouncing slightly on his feet to keep loose. "My daddy used to say that it ain't about how hard you can hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward." The crowd was starting to buzz again, but this time it sounded different. Instead of excitement about watching another quick execution, there was uncertainty in their voices. Some of them were actually leaning forward in their seats, like they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Vorthak lowered his massive head and charged again, this time leading with those bone-crushing mandibles that had torn apart countless opponents. But Jake was ready for it. He learned something important from that first punch. He could take whatever this overgrown bug could dish out. "My turn," Jake said, and stepped forward to meet the charge head-on. By the time Jake finished with his third opponent, he looked like he'd been through a blender. His left eye was swollen completely shut, giving him a lopsided view of the world. His shirt, which had started the day as a plain gray T-shirt, now hung in shreds around his shoulders like some kind of battle flag. His jeans were stained with purple blood from a slug-like creature, green goo from something that looked like a walking tree, and his own red blood from more cuts than he could count. But Jake Miller was still on his feet, still moving forward, still ready for whatever came next. Up in the observation deck, Dr. Lisa Bennett was going crazy trying to understand the readings on her medical scanner. Every few seconds, she'd tap the screen or shake the device, convinced it had to be broken somehow. "This makes absolutely no sense," she muttered to Commander Robert Hayes, who was standing next to her with his arms crossed. "Look at these numbers. His pain receptors are going off like Christmas lights. The guy should be screaming in agony, but his motor functions are still working perfectly." Hayes watched Jake duck under a swing that would have taken his head clean off and couldn't help but smile. That's Jake for you. Built tough as an old pickup truck and twice as stubborn. But Robert, medically speaking, this is impossible. The human body has limits. "Maybe most human bodies do," Hayes replied, But you've never met anyone from Jake's hometown. Those people fix their own broken bones with duct tape and keep working. Down on the arena floor, Jake was getting ready to face his fourth opponent of the day. This one was completely different from the others. Instead of armor or muscle, this creature was made entirely of some kind of living crystal. It stood about 7 feet tall and looked like someone had carved a warrior out of diamonds and then brought it to life. When it moved, the light from the arena reflected off its surface in 1,000 different directions. Jake had heard the crowd talking about this one. They called it the Glass Dancer, and apparently it could slice through solid steel like butter. Its arms ended in razor-sharp points that could extend and retract like switchblades. The thing had supposedly cut a starship in half during its last major battle. Great, Jake mumbled to himself, wiping blood from his good eye. First a tank, then a tree, then whatever that purple thing was, and now I'm fighting a living chandelier. The crystal creature moved with a fluid grace that was almost hypnotic. Its first attack came faster than Jake could react, leaving 3 deep gashes across his chest that immediately started bleeding. The second swipe caught him across the left arm, opening up cuts that went all the way to the bone. But Jake had learned something important over the last 3 fights. These aliens were used to opponents who went down fast. They were built for quick, decisive victories against enemies who couldn't handle serious pain. They'd never faced someone who simply refused to quit. Up in the diplomatic viewing area, Ambassador Kelton was leaning so far forward, he was practically falling out of his chair. His 4 eyes were all focused on his scanning equipment, which was showing readings that made no sense according to everything he knew about biology. "This is scientifically impossible," he said to his assistant, a nervous creature that looked like an octopus with anxiety issues. "Our sensors are showing massive trauma across multiple systems. By all rights, this human should be dead or unconscious." The assistant was frantically checking data streams from a dozen different sources, his tentacles moving across multiple keyboards at once. "Sir, I believe we may have made a significant miscalculation about human physiology. Their pain tolerance appears to be far beyond what we considered possible." Kelton watched as the crystal creature landed another devastating hit that sent Jake sliding across the sand. The human got up again, slower this time, but still moving with purpose. "There's something else, sir," the assistant continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I've been analyzing their historical records. Their species regularly engages in activities that would be considered torture by most civilizations. They call them sports, and they appear to enjoy them. That's not possible. Sir, they have something called football, where large individuals deliberately crash into each other at high speed. They have boxing, where they stand still and allow opponents to strike their heads repeatedly. They even have something called rugby that appears to be organized violence with a ball." Down in the arena, Jake managed to land a solid right hook on his crystal opponent's jaw. The sound was like breaking glass, and a spider web of cracks appeared across the creature's face. "You know what?" Jake said, breathing hard but still grinning with a split lip. "I'm starting to enjoy this." The assistant looked at his readings again. "Sir, I believe we've also underestimated their capacity for what they call spite." If the assistant thought spite was the right word, Jake thought to himself as he prepared for the next attack. Then he clearly had never met anyone from Texas. When Jake stepped into the arena for his final fight, he looked like he'd been hit by a tornado, struck by lightning, and then run over by a truck for good measure. His right leg was dragging slightly from where the crystal creature had sliced through his thigh muscle. Blood had dried in his hair from a dozen different cuts, and his remaining good eye was so swollen he could barely see out of it. But somehow, impossibly, Jake Miller was still standing. His final opponent floated into the arena like a living storm cloud. Champion Corvex didn't have a solid body like the others. Instead, he was pure energy wrapped in a vaguely humanoid shape, crackling with electricity that made the air itself smell like ozone. When he moved, reality seemed to bend around him. The crowd had gone completely silent when Corvex appeared, and even the other alien fighters in the holding areas had stopped their usual chittering and growling. Jake had heard the stories about this one. Corvex was the undisputed champion of the Galactic Council's combat trials. He'd held the title for over 50 years, and in all that time No opponent had lasted more than 30 seconds against him. Most didn't last 10. The energy being could pass through solid matter like it wasn't even there, then solidify just long enough to hit with the force of a plasma cannon. "You fought well, human." Corvex's voice echoed through the arena without him actually opening a mouth. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating through Jake's bones. "Your persistence has been entertaining, but this ends now." Jake wiped blood from his nose with the back of his hand and managed what might have been a smile. "Well, partner, I've heard that song before. Let's see what you got." The first energy blast hit Jake, like getting struck by lightning while standing inside a microwave. The pure force of it launched him clear across the arena, his boots leaving trails in sand as he flew through the air. He hit the energy barrier wall with enough force to actually crack the supposedly unbreakable surface, then crumpled to ground like a dropped puppet. The crowd exploded into cheers. Finally, the stubborn human was down. Alien spectators were jumping up and down, waving whatever appendages they had, celebrating the return to normalcy. Some were already heading for the exits, assuming the show was over, up in the observation deck. Dr. Lisa Bennett watched her medical monitors in horror. For 3 long seconds, Jake's vitals completely flatlined. Heart rate, 0. Brain activity, nothing. Respiratory function, stopped. She was about to call it when suddenly, impossibly, all his readings spiked back to life. "No way," she whispered, checking her equipment again. "That's not possible." He was clinically dead for 3 seconds. Commander Robert Hayes was gripping the railing so hard his knuckles had gone white. "Come on, Jake. Get up. You've taken worse hits changing a transmission." Down in the arena, Jake's fingers twitched. Then his hand moved. Slowly, like an old man getting out of bed on a cold morning, Jake pushed himself up onto his hands and knees. Blood was running from his ears, and his vision was swimming so badly he couldn't tell which way was up, but his fists were still clenched. "Is that—" Jake's voice was hoarse and shaky, but there was still fight in it. "Is that supposed to hurt?" The crowd's cheering died instantly. Corvex, who had been preparing to leave the arena, stopped and turned back toward the impossible human. "Impossible," the energy being said, and fired again. This blast sent Jake tumbling end over end across the sand. Again, he hit the wall. Again, he slumped to ground. And again, after a long moment, he started getting back up. Corvex fired a 3rd time, then a 4th. Each energy blast was powerful enough to vaporize a small building, but each time, Jake somehow found a way to get back to his feet. By the 7th blast, the crowd had gone completely silent. By the 10th, some of the aliens were actually backing away from the arena in fear. Jake had figured out something important by the 12th blast. Corvex was getting tired. Energy beings might be incredibly powerful, but they weren't built for long fights. They were used to ending things quickly with overwhelming force. Jake, on the other hand, had grown up in a world where sometimes they had to work a double shift on 3 hours of sleep with a hangover and a pulled back muscle. By the 15th blast, Jake had learned to read the attacks. He could see the slight shimmer in the air right before Corvex fired. He started rolling with the impacts, using the arena walls to absorb some of the force, turning devastating hits into merely terrible ones. When Corvex's 16th blast barely knocked Jake down to one knee, the energy being's form flickered with what might have been exhaustion. "How?" Corvex whispered as Jake staggered forward one more time, his fists raised despite everything. "How are you still standing?" Jake spit blood into the sand and managed a grin that was somehow more terrifying than any roar of rage. "Practice, partner. Lots and lots of practice." 3 weeks had passed since Jake Miller knocked out the supposedly unbeatable champion Corvex with a lucky haymaker that came from pure Texas stubbornness and absolutely nothing else. Now he stood in a massive galactic council chambers, looking like he'd been through a meat grinder, but somehow come out the other side with a smile. His left arm was still in a sling from where Corvex's energy blast had nearly cooked it off. Purple and yellow bruises covered half his face, making him look like he'd gone 10 rounds with a freight train and asked for more. His knuckles were still bandaged, and he walked with a slight limp that the doctor said would probably never fully go away. But Jake Miller was alive, Earth had been granted full membership in the Galactic Council, and for the first time in the organization's history, a species had won the combat trials not through superior weapons or overwhelming strength, but through sheer bloody-minded refusal to quit. The council chambers were bigger than anything Jake had ever imagined. Representatives from over 1,000 different worlds filled seats that stretched up toward a ceiling so high he couldn't see it. There were creatures that looked like walking trees, others that seemed to be made of living metal, and a few that hurt his eyes to look at directly because they existed in more dimensions than his brain could process. Ambassador Kelton approached Jake with an expression that was completely different from their first meeting. Gone was the sneering contempt and barely hidden disgust. Instead, the tall, blue-skinned diplomat looked at Jake the way people back home looked at war heroes or championship fighters. "Mr. Miller," Kelton said, and his voice actually had respect in it now. "We've been conducting extensive research into your species since the trials concluded. The findings have been illuminating." Jake adjusted his sling and tried not to wince as the movement pulled at his injured ribs. "Yeah? What did you find out?" "Your planet operates under gravitational conditions that are 30% stronger than what we consider standard," Kelton began, consulting a data pad with his 4 hands. "Most species will require mechanical assistance just to walk on your world's surface. Keeps us in shape," Jake replied with a shrug of his good shoulder. "We've also analyzed your weather patterns," Kelton continued, his voice growing more amazed with each fact he read. "Your world experiences something called hurricanes that generate wind speeds capable of destroying our standard architectural structures. You have tornadoes that can lift entire buildings into the air. Your winter seasons drop temperatures low enough to freeze most biological processes, while your summers reach levels that would be considered weapons-grade heat exposure." Jake nodded. "Yeah, Mother Nature can be a real pain sometimes, but you learn to deal with it." "Most remarkably," Kelton said, his 4 eyes all focused intently on Jake, "your native fauna actively hunts your species for food. We found records of creatures called bears that can weigh over half a ton, alligators that have remained unchanged predators for millions of years, and something called a hippopotamus that apparently kills more of your people annually than wars do." "Hippos are mean as hell," Jake agreed, "but they usually leave you alone if you don't bother them first." Dr. Lisa Bennett walked over to join the conversation, her medical tablet in hand and a look of professional fascination on her face. "Jake, the council has been asking some interesting questions about human physiology and psychology." "Such as?" Jake asked. "Well, they've been studying our military training programs," she said, scrolling through her notes. "Apparently, the concept of deliberately subjecting recruits to physical and mental stress in order to make them stronger is completely foreign to most galactic civilizations." Kelton nodded enthusiastically. "We also learned about your recreational activities. You voluntarily participate in activities called contact sports where individuals deliberately collide with each other at high speeds for entertainment. Football season starting up again soon," Jake said, his face lighting up at the thought. "You should come watch a game sometime. Cowboys are looking pretty good this year." "We've also discovered," Dr. Bennett continued, "that humans regularly engage in activities that other species would consider forms of torture. Boxing, wrestling, martial arts, extreme sports. And you do these things for fun. Life's too short to play it safe all the time," Jake said. Ambassador Kelton leaned forward, his expression serious. "Mr. Miller, the Galactic Council has made an unprecedented request. They want Earth to help establish new combat training protocols for other species. It seems that in all our thousands of years of civilization, we never learned how did you put it, take a hit and keep fighting." Jake looked out through the massive transparent walls of the space station at the incredible vista of stars and ships and worlds beyond counting. Somewhere out there were billions of intelligent beings who had built incredible technologies and created vast civilizations, but who had apparently never learned the simple lesson that sometimes you have to get knocked down before you can really learn how to stand up. Most species, Dr. Bennett explained, have evolved past the point where they regularly face physical adversity. They've eliminated most sources of pain and danger from their daily lives. When they encounter real hardship, they simply don't know how to cope with it. "That's kind of sad, actually," Jake said, thinking about all the challenges that had made him who he was. The hard times growing up poor, the brutal training in the Marines, the long hours in the garage, the fights he'd lost before he learned how to win. All of it had hurt at the time, but it had also made him stronger. The Council wants to know if humans would be willing to serve as instructors, Kelton said, to teach other species about resilience, endurance, and what you call mental toughness. Jake considered this for a long moment, watching alien ships the size of cities drift past the station's windows. Then he smiled, the same easy grin that had unnerved so many of his opponents in the arena. Well, he said, I reckon we can teach them a thing or two about getting back up after you've been knocked down. The galaxy was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the one with the biggest weapons or the strongest armor. Sometimes it's the one who simply refuses to stay down, no matter how many times you knock them over. And humans, as it turned out, were very good at getting back up,